Thank you for that. I welcome the public discussion on e-invoicing for all the benefits that it will provide, chief among them, improved tax collection and compliance, faster detection of fraud and anomalies, reduced administrative burden, better and timelier data. Madam Speaker, Jamaica has been on a journey in the modernization of tax administration, Jamaica, TAJ. The IDB has been a partner with the TAJ since 20 Tax Administration Platform. Tax Administration Platform. We on this side, Madam Speaker, have continued that journey to include a significant upgrade of the system by March 2027 to, among other things, make it easier to navigate the TAJ's website. Cabinet approved the procurement recently. Madam Speaker, our journey is set to begin with the scoping work for e-invoicing based on the digital maturity level of the TAJ system. As you can see, Madam Speaker, many modules have been installed over the years, from e-registry to e-filing to e-payment through to virtual file systems. And those with the check marks are those in place. Now, Madam Speaker, having done all the work since 2014 to get to this point, the e-invoicing work can now begin. Thank you to the dedicated team at the TAJ. It is going to require use of advanced electronic signature, field standardization, meaning how the data is collected, online validation operation modules, invoice verification, and will require technology to be deployed for interconnectivity between the taxpayer system and that of the TAJ. Because, as you can imagine, Madam Speaker, e-invoicing is massively more transactions intensive than anything the TAJ has done in its history. Madam Speaker, we expect for e-invoicing to take at least 2 to 3 years to roll out and be fully operational. As you can see from the slide, it has taken other countries with more resources a lot longer to roll out. So we are being very ambitious in our 2 to 3 years time frame expectation. So we would be looking at fiscal year 2028-29.
Hello, you alright, my friend? Big up yourself, man. Me there, man.
In Jamaica.
Wow, watch the budget.
Contrary to what the opposition spokesman on finance would have us believe, there are no revenues to be earned from e-invoicing that the opposition spokesman on finance could credibly include in the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. Or even the next fiscal year. Madam Speaker, it not go work. But Madam Speaker, let me say unequivocally that I welcome the discourse and the opposition support and their positive stance for e-invoicing to be implemented in Jamaica with alacrity. I know we don't often see eye to eye on most matters, but on the need to move towards implementation of e-invoices, we can both claim that Jamaica will stand today. So, Madam Speaker, I turn now to the budget that the opposition spokesman on.
I'm waiting. Come on. Taking forever. What's wrong with you?
He said that electric invoicing system would deliver $8.6 billion in the upcoming fiscal year. He also Madam Speaker, I have to ask, what can go so? So, Madam Speaker, I want to say to the opposition spokesman on finance, there are no e-invoicing revenues that can be realistically expected in the upcoming fiscal year 2026-27, nor might I add in the next fiscal year to replace 8.6 billion of revenue measures. There is no magic bullet of e-invoicing gains that every global expert knows take years to materialize. So, Madam Speaker, I'm going to exalt that figure, that 8.6. Madam Speaker, this government will not gamble with the future of our country. Madam Speaker, we will not gamble with the future of our country. We do not seek to score cheap political points by entrusting the future of the vulnerable, the continued stability of the Jamaican dollar, the sustainability of our national debt, and our hard-earned reputation for central government's prudent financial management on the fantasy of major software upgrade happening overnight. Madam Speaker, we have chosen the path of fiscal responsibility because it is the only credible path that leads to a stable recovery. And that is where we will continue to be, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on the issue of digital nomad, the proposal from the spokesman on finance reflects a worthwhile instinct, but it illustrates the difference between identifying a promising concept and presenting a fully developed fiscal instrument. A digital nomad program may well have merit as part of a broader strategy to diversify Jamaica's visitor economy, attract long-term remote workers, and stimulate spending in select sectors. However, it does not yet stand up as a sufficiently robust revenue measure for closing a gap in the upcoming fiscal year 2026-27. Madam Speaker, the issue is not that the idea lacks potential, but that it has been advanced without the level of policy architecture, implementation detail, and fiscal realism required for serious budget building. Even in a sister Caribbean country that introduced the concept 5 years ago and has often been cited as an early mover, the results suggest caution rather than easy optimism. Thousands of digital nomads were attracted over the period, yet the revenue yield remained relatively modest, underscoring that such programs are better understood as medium-term economic enhancers than immediate fiscal solutions. Madam Speaker, the more thoughtful commentary that has since emerged is therefore correct. The proposal points in an interesting direction, but it requires considerably more work on eligibility, infrastructure, tax treatment, housing implications, health coverage, administrative design, and projected returns before it can credibly be presented as a measure capable of materially strengthening the government's revenue position for the upcoming fiscal year, fiscal 2026-27. So, Madam Speaker, I will also X that figure out for this upcoming fiscal year 2020. Madam Madam Speaker, the opposition spokesman on finance said he would take $1 billion from Factories Corporation. This is a government entity that develops, lease, and manages industrial and commercial real estate throughout Jamaica. The primary goal of Factories Corporation is to drive economic growth by providing the infrastructure needed for businesses to operate. So I want to ask the opposition spokesman on finance, are you sure you want to take $1 billion out of a company that helps to drive economic growth? No. So I'm going to X out this one as well. Madam Speaker, of all the things the spokesman on finance said, the one that alarmed me the most is that he said he would take, and that was his word, he would take an additional $1 billion from the Bank of Jamaica. Madam Speaker, the Bank of Jamaica, by law, Mr. Lawyer, opposition leader, determines the level of dividends that can reasonably be transferred in any year to the central government. There are strict guidelines in law. It is not advisable that the Minister of Finance calls the Bank of Jamaica and takes an additional $1 billion. So what happens if you need $20 billion, $100 billion, $200 billion? Would you simply take it from the Bank of Jamaica? Opposition spokesman on finance, Madam Speaker, that was what obtained in the long days ago when inflation ruled unfettered in Jamaica. In a particular period, let's say 1972 to 1980, Madam Speaker, the Bank of Jamaica became independent on April 15, 2021. It conducts a very sensitive monetary policy free of political interference. And so FYI, you can't just take an additional $1 billion from the Bank of Jamaica, even if you think it won't compromise the institution's core function or its operational capacity. Madam Speaker, it appears the opposition spokesman on finance is telegraphing the intention of the opposition if it ever sits in the seat of government. Madam Speaker, a government cannot simply ask the Bank of Jamaica for funding. The amendments to the Bank of Jamaica Act, which established the inflation targeting regime and central bank independence, places explicit and intrinsic guardrails around how resources can move from Bank of Jamaica to government. Madam Speaker, those Jamaicans who are in business know that only realized profits can be distributed. It is the same for the Bank of Jamaica. Only realized profits can be distributed. And the Bank of Jamaica's capital to monetary liability ratio has to be at least 5% before any profits can be distributed. Madam Speaker, it is important that the opposition understands that only 25% of realized profits are distributed when capital to monetary liability ratio is greater than 5% and less than 8%. All the realized profits are...
With Whoop, understand your strain, sleep and recovery, and see how your daily habits connect to how you feel. With real-time insights, personalized guidance, 14-day battery life, and
inject capital if the ratio falls below 3%. So really, in effect, neither the Bank of Jamaica or the government has any discretion where the distribution of profits are concerned. Madam Speaker, I was the junior minister in the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service when the work started to establish the Bank of Jamaica as an independent institution responsible for policy directive for inflation to be in the 3 to 6% range. Madam Speaker, we have lived with relatively predictable inflation in Jamaica. And so I say to the opposition spokesman on finance, do not try to sell to Jamaicans the notion that you can simply take $1 billion from the Bank of Jamaica. We've worked too hard to achieve a relatively stable inflation environment for anyone to try to undermine that very important pillar of our economy. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, come to think of it, the opposition has zero experience managing the country in an inflation targeting environment. They've never done it. So there's a thing or two, Madam Speaker, the opposition needs to learn. Madam Speaker, so, Madam Speaker, I will X out that $1 billion from the Bank of Jamaica. Yes, that's water. Madam Speaker, the maths is not mathsing. Madam Speaker, when you replace recurring revenue stream, which is what the NHT contribution and the revenue measures are, when you replace those with debt, you have to keep borrowing because next year you will be in the same position. You have to find borrowed funds again to replace the recurring NHT and revenue measures, and it never stops. Obviously, you would have a choice to cut expenditure and or get additional revenues. So, Madam Speaker, to those of you who want additional clarification on what this will look like, let me give you the following example. Let's assume that the NHT contribution of 11.4 billion and the revenue measure of 18 billion are the only sources of income to government. These are recurring. This means that every year you can count on those funds going into the treasury. But the opposition spokesman on finance has said no NHT contribution and no revenue measures. In discontinuing the NHT contribution and not doing the revenue measures, I ask, where would the money come from? The opposition spokesman on finance said he would borrow. Okay, that's his desire. So the opposition spokesman on finance borrows to replace the NHT contribution and the revenue measure in the upcoming fiscal year. What happens in the next fiscal year? The opposition spokesman on finance has to borrow again, because the recurrent expenditures are not going away. But this time, the spokesman on finance has to borrow more because the 2 billion that the opposition spokesman on finance never sent to Airports Authority of Jamaica because he decided to defer the construction of AAJ's corporate headquarters into fiscal year 2027-28 is needed. The contractors are ready to mobilize. They're anxious. So the opposition spokesman on finance would have to include this $2 billion in his borrowing. Madam Speaker, What happens in year 3? The opposition spokesman on finance has to borrow again, using this very simplified example, just to show you the impact of using debt to replace recurrent revenues. Madam Speaker, I am sure you get the picture, and this table shows the folly of that. So, Madam Speaker, instead of the need to borrow $29.4 billion, you're now at 31.4, and then back to 29.4, assuming no other expenses pop up on you. Madam Speaker, these are the intricacies of how numbers in one budget year relate to the numbers in another budget year. And when you lose recurrent revenues, trying to replace it with debt is a state of illusory happiness. Or false contentment based on misconception or a refusal to accept the truth of a situation. Madam Speaker, the spokesman on finance presented a case for using $19 billion in debt to replace the revenue measures in the upcoming fiscal year. I have demonstrated that he will need way more in debt because the e-invoicing and digital nomad revenue streams are not going to materialize for at least the next 2 to 3 years. Additionally, the opposition spokesman on finance would have to keep borrowing, as I demonstrated, with the recurrent expenditure as a result of not having the benefit of the contribution of NHT or the revenue measures. Madam Speaker, I'll pause on the opposition spokesman of finance and turn my attention to the leader of the opposition. Madam Speaker, on the part of the leader of the opposition, he said he identified revenues. He said, Madam Speaker, that he identified revenues of about 2% of GDP from compliance, or projected GDP for fiscal year 2026-27 is $3,857 billion, and so 2% of that would be approximately $77 billion. And if you could make the screen larger so that they could see it. So, Madam Speaker, if the opposition leader identified $77 billion of new revenues from compliance, why then would the opposition spokesman on finance need to borrow any money at all? Madam Speaker, it appears the left hand is not coordinating with the right hand. Madam Speaker, a Prime Minister in waiting and a Finance Minister in waiting are possibly not talking. What can go so? What can go so? Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I now turn to what was presented by the leader of the opposition. and his many promises that the Jamaican people are not likely to see fulfilled. Once again today, I will demonstrate how unhinged are the many proposals that the leader of the opposition has put forward. So, Madam Speaker, let's start out with the 77 billion of revenues. He said he could find that, all right, 77 billion. Promise number one, nutrition. Madam Speaker, the first promise number one, nutrition support to 245,000 school children every single school day. And if you assume $150 a day for 190 days for the school year, that would be $69.8 billion. Madam Speaker, it would practically wipe out the 77 from compliance, right? And of course, I use $150 because the child has to get breakfast, lunch, and an afternoon snack. So I couldn't give any less than that. Promise number two, smaller classes. Very commendable, Madam Speaker, but can it be financed? You'd have to hire more teachers. And I assume you hire about 33% more teachers, or about 9,000 teachers. That would cost $41 billion. Transportation for 20,000 students outside the JUTC range. Assume 500 per day for 190 school days. That's $1.9 billion. And the first in the family scholarship program. And I know when the leader of opposition said that, I looked at the MP from St. Catherine North, and you could see he was quite annoyed that the leader of opposition would be there trotting out his idea of first in the family scholarship program. So Madam Speaker, a bachelor's of business administration costs about $457,000 per year, and this is a real number. Approximately 32,000 babies are born annually, of which roughly 30% are born to new mothers. So if you look at the cohort born 18 years ago, they're the ones who are 18 years today. There are about 9,600 of those. And the first in the family scholarship program would be $4.4 billion. And that would be an annual. But you're going to make sure. But you're going to finance them. You're going to finance them. You're going to make sure they go. You are going to make sure they go. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Okay. Well, Madam Speaker, it seems I touched a chord over there. Promise number 5, investing in teacher training, a very lofty goal, Madam Speaker, currently. The Jamaica Teaching Council provides continuing professional development for teachers. So we'll add 300 million for additional spending. Promise number 6, modern learning techniques and materials for teachers. We will add $1 billion there. $1 billion revolving loan fund, path benefits for pregnant mothers, and again using the same statistics, 35,000 children born annually. That will be another 2.1 billion. 14 support centers for victims of abuse, 1 in every parish. Let's assume 350 million. Support to churches, $1 billion. This one, Madam Speaker, it's a new one. It's a new one. Promise number 11, clean slate for thousands of Jamaicans. There are 1,462 in the labor force. Madam Speaker, if you assume that they need relief of about $40,000 monthly, you're looking at $702 billion, right? There were no bounds around it. It didn't say it was a 10-year program. All right. Then, of course, you would end the NHC contribution and minimum wage would transition to living wage. That is asked the PIOJ to develop this. So the deficit would be huge, Madam Speaker. Many times, the $77 billion that the opposition leader said he would find from compliance. But then now, you would have to add the 19 billion that the spokesman on finance said he was going to borrow. And then the additional interest rate on top of that. Madam Speaker, the bottom line is, when you calculate the debt to GDP, where we are currently, we're projected to end fiscal year 2026-27 at 65.7%. When you add what the leader of the opposition would do when you add the cost of all his promises, we're looking at total debt to GDP.
Recommended 8 years running. Now that has a nice ring to it. AJ Bell, feel good investing.
Moving in the wrong direction. Madam Speaker. Yes. Madam Speaker, this would be a return to profligacy, wanton spending, and using debt to fulfill promises. We know where this took us. During their administration. I don't know about you on that side, but over here, we will not go back there. Madam Speaker, both the opposition leader and the opposition spokesman on finance said the environmental protection levy will be going to the consolidated fund. Here's what they said. The name of the tax suggests that the cash flows from it will be directed towards environmental protection, towards our coastlines, our watersheds, our forests, the very natural infrastructure that Melissa reminded us that we cannot afford to neglect. But the money goes into the consolidated fund, they said. None of it is ring-fenced for environmental purposes. So we have a levy collecting money in the name of the environment, but it is not dedicated to the environment. It's treated as another revenue source for the government. That's what they said. Well, Madam Speaker, the minister with responsibility for water, environment, and climate change will tell you that environmental protection levy is being pursued against the backdrop of the government's signaled intent to boost green growth to enhance climate resilience. This includes a target to expand protected areas by 30% by 2030, with 5 new areas planned for declaration in the coming financial year. Jamaica is also working to establish global resolutions to address the increase in plastic waste, building on the single-use plastic ban that began in 2019. So, Madam Speaker, both the opposition leader and the spokesman on finance are dead wrong. And they just need to look at Appendix 1, page 5 of the fiscal policy paper. Let me remind them what that looks like. It looks like this. That was laid in Parliament, a copy of which they got. And they can look in that to see how much of the budget is spent on environmental protection and conservation. In fiscal year 2024-25, the year of burial, $11.5 billion. In fiscal year 2025-26, the year of Melissa, $13.2 billion. And going forward, on average, for the medium term, $9.1 billion will be spent each fiscal year on protection of biodiversity and landscape, pollution abatement, solid waste management, and other environmental protection activities. So the spokesman on finance simply needs to turn to page 5 in Appendix 1, and he will see the spending. By the way, Madam Speaker, reporting our budget by functional classification only started under this government, fiscal year 2016-17. And so, Madam Speaker, the spokesman on finance would not be aware of this development. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I now want to address 2 of the revenue measures. Madam Speaker, following the announcement of the introduction of a special consumption tax, SCT, on non-alcoholic sweetened beverages in February 2026, we have received feedback from a number of stakeholders, including the beverage manufacturers and importers. Madam Speaker, we are a listening government. We listened to the various representations, clearly assess them, and where they have merit, we act. I'm pleased, therefore, to advise this Honourable House of a change in the approach to the SCT on non-alcoholic sweetened beverages that will make the measure more effective and more equitable. Madam Speaker, let me be clear about the intent. The SCT on non-alcoholic sweetened beverages was conceived from the very beginning as a health measure. Its purpose is to address the burden of non-communicable disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, that bear down so heavily on our people and on our public health system. The original announcement of a rate of 2 cents per milliliter was made for reasons of administrative simplicity. A volumetric tax is straightforward to calculate, to collect, and to verify. However, stakeholders pointed out, and we agreed, that a flat volume-based tax does not vary by sugar content and therefore does not distinguish between a low sugar and a high sugar product. We took that concern seriously, and because health has always been the underlying intent of the measure, we have redesigned the SCT to be based We took that concern seriously, and because health has always been the underlying intent of the measure, we have redesigned the SCT to be based directly on sugar content rather than on the volume of the beverage. Madam Speaker, the special consumption tax on non-alcoholic sweetened beverage will therefore be levied at a rate of 22 cents per gram of added sugar rather than on the volume of the beverage. Madam Speaker, this change will require some lead time for manufacturers, importers, and our tax administration to prepare. As a result, the SCT will go into effect on May 1, 2026 instead of April 1, as previously announced. Madam Speaker, the logic of this design is simple and principled. It is the sugar that causes the harm, so it is the sugar that should be taxed. A beverage with no added sugar will attract no SCT. A beverage with modest added sugar will attract a modest SCT. A beverage with higher sugar content will attract a higher SCT directly and proportionally. This is entirely consistent with how the SCT on alcohol is levied based on liters of pure alcohol. Importantly, Madam Speaker, this structure creates a genuine commercial incentive for manufacturers and importers to reduce the sugar content of their products. The lower the sugar, the lower the tax. Madam Speaker, I also want to signal clearly that this is not the end of the conversation, as we will monitor this application in practice, its effect on prices, on consumption patterns, on reformulation decisions, and on public health outcomes. We recognize that during implementation, practical questions may arise that were not anticipated in advance, and the government is committed to working through those questions in good faith. We will continue a structured dialogue with both the beverage industry and with health professionals on how this measure can be strengthened and improved over time. To manufacturers and importers, the message is straightforward. Reduce the sugar in your products and the tax burden falls. The government is not seeking to harm a sector that employs thousands of Jamaicans. We're changing the incentive structure, and we believe the industry is fully capable of responding to it. To the Jamaican public, I ask you to consider there's hardly a family in this country that has not been touched by diabetes, hypertension, or obesity. These are not distant statistics. They are our parents, our children, our siblings, our neighbors. Every lower sugar product on our shelves is a step in the right direction, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, every informed choice at the shop counter is an act of investment in your own health and in the health of this nation. This government is changing the incentives for industry and for consumers alike. Because a healthier Jamaica is a more productive Jamaica. And a more productive Jamaica is the foundation of everything else we're trying to build. But Madam Speaker, we told the industry that in the rethinking and recasting of this, we have to remain revenue neutral. I turn now to changes to environmental protection levy. Madam Speaker, we also received feedback on the changes announced to the environmental protection levy. I had announced that the base on which the levy is applied for manufacturers would move from 75% to 100% of sales. The manufacturers raised a legitimate concern that this change would place local manufacturers at a disadvantage relative to importers, on whom the environmental protection levy is applied to CIF value, which naturally excludes the distribution margin that is embedded in the selling price. When the 75% base for manufacturers was introduced in 2015, Madam Speaker, it was deliberately designed to put domestic producers on a level footing with importers. Madam Speaker, we're therefore retaining the 75% of sales base for manufacturers. However, Madam Speaker, to maintain revenue neutrality with the retention of the 75% manufacturers base, we'll have to increase the environmental protection levy rate modestly from 0.8% as previously announced to 0.85% for both manufacturers and importers. Madam Speaker, I want to be explicit on the fiscal position. Both of these changes have been carefully calibrated to be revenue neutral. The projected yield from the consumption tax on non-alcoholic sweetened beverage and the environmental protection levy remains as previously announced. Madam Speaker, we've met with the beverage manufacturers. They've asked us to go to the tiered approach, to which we're not opposed. And the Ministry of Health and Wellness prefers the tiered approach. In the course of the year, we will continue the working group, which consists of Ministry of Health and Wellness, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, and the manufacturers to work towards the tiered system. But we will begin with a simple application that targets the grams of sugar. We will have a standard, well, I just announced the standard rate per gram of sugar. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to highlight that in keeping with this administration leadership style, we listened intently to the industry. Madam Speaker, in closing this fiscal 2026-27 budget debate, I choose to reiterate that history will only repeat itself should the opposition have a chance to implement their recommendations without concern for whether or not they're being funded. There's no way that Jamaica today can return to the Jamaica of the run with it policy. And the wanton abandonment of fiscal responsibility characteristics of their style of government. Why else will they trot out again this year the raft of promises that cannot be fully funded? It is apparent that there is blatant disregard for the steady hand with which we have led and the diligence and stability that we have sought to create. Speaker, the Prime Minister demonstrated the massive reconstruction opportunities that will become available to Jamaicans and the vision of a resurgent Jamaica. As I said at the beginning of my speech, the cornerstones to move us from resilience to resurgence have been set and driven by the builder himself, Prime Minister Andrew Holness. Jamaicans can expect a new and different Jamaica to unfold over the next 3 to 5 years, right before our very eyes. Madam Speaker, I confirm that this budget that has been presented is designed to build a caring economy, a compassionate economy, one that improves lives.
Welcome to my bank, Revolut, with its layers upon layers of protection, like quick selfie checks for big withdrawals, should anyone attempt.
Madam Speaker, I say from the bottom of my heart, God bless Jamaica, the land we love.
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the bill to be read a second time.
Thank you. The question is that the appropriations bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Apply a Sum out of the Consolidated Fund to the Service of the Year ending on the 31st day of March 2027 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament be read a second time.
Thank you. The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Marshall? Minister of Finance, members, we are now in committee, Standing Finance Committee. Minister, how would you like to proceed?
Put the clauses, Madam Speaker.
Members, I put clause 1. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the schedule, sections 2 and 3. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with no amendments. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Okay. Thank you, Marshall. We're back in the House. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments. Minister?
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the bill be read a third time.
Thank you. The question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Clerk?
An act to apply a sum out of the consolidated fund to the service of the year ending on the 31st day of March 2027 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament is read a third time and passed.
House Leader?
Madam Speaker, let me again thank the Minister of Finance for masterful closing of the budget debate, setting the record straight and showing us reality from fantasy. Madam Speaker, as we are in public business, we had tabled on the 10th day of March the Civil Service Establishment General Order was laid on the House and notice given for its affirmation. Today we will take that order, and as such, I ask that you turn back over to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance, you may commence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In accordance with the Civil Service Establishment Act, in accordance with the Civil Service Establishment Act 1976, the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2026 has been prepared and is presented to indicate changes to the Civil Service Establishment General Order 2024. The Civil Service Establishment General Order 2026 outlines the reorganization of ministries and departments and consequently the creation of new posts, abolition of posts and the reclassification, upgrading and retitling of existing posts. The major changes are to be effected in the General Order 2026 and include the integration of the National Council on Drug Abuse into the Ministry of Health and Wellness as a department. This action follows Cabinet Decision number 18/21 and 33/17, which granted approval and the subsequent passage of the National Council on Drug Abuse Repeal Act 2023 number 15, which legally transferred the National Council on Drug Abuse, legally transferred those functions to the ministry responsible for health and restructured it as a department within the ministry. The key drivers for this integration are an expanded mandate for the National Council on Drug Abuse, now encompassing responsibility for national mental health prevention strategies and harm reduction, in addition to its traditional focus on drug abuse education and prevention. Madam Speaker, the recognition that the existing National Council on Drug Abuse structure as a statutory body was inadequate and no longer fit for purpose to effectively realize this new broader mandate, especially considering the increased prevalence and accessibility of drugs. Madam Speaker, the need for a new organizational design to accommodate the expanded roles, responsibilities, and a new governance context where management reports to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health and Wellness instead of a board. It's also a strategic shift towards a more proactive and preventative approach in substance abuse and mental wellness. Madam Speaker, this integration involves establishing 306 posts and creating several new branches For example, strategic planning, research, prevention/education/treatment. There's also retitling and transferring of one post, abolishing 46 posts under the old National Council on Drug Abuse structure when vacant, aligning with redundancy plans under the Public Sector Transformation Action Plan. Madam Speaker, the retitling of the Ministry of Education and Youth to the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information. In addition, a comprehensive restructuring across several key operational areas happened within the ministry. This affected the regional financial management sections, the newly amalgamated examinations and assessment administration services branch, merging the former with the latter, and the reorganized regional building sections, renamed regional maintenance and infrastructure development sections. Madam Speaker, after years without review, this extensive reorganization addresses long-standing structural weaknesses, insufficient staffing, and increased workloads. The reform aimed to strengthen financial management and internal controls, streamline examination and assessment processes, enhance infrastructure maintenance oversight, and better align the ministry's structure with its operational needs and strategic mandates. These combined Ministry of Education initiatives involve establishing 106 posts, including the regularization of 9 temporary posts, upgrading 38 posts, reclassifying 38 posts, retitling 86 posts, abolishing 1 post when vacant. Madam Speaker, there was also the establishment of 102 posts within the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the JCF, to enhance ICT capabilities, improve organizational efficiency, and support technological advances like Jamaica Eye and the Station Records Management System, addressing staffing needs in critical technical areas. Madam Speaker, there was also the abolition of 1,250 vacant posts from the central government vestige of the Tax Administration Directorate. The General Amendment reflects changes in 3 areas. Part 1. This section shows changes in the complement of posts in ministries and departments. It reflects changes in posts, for example, reclassification of posts, new posts created, retitling of posts, upgrading of posts, and the effective dates for these changes. The breakdown is as follows. 1,481 posts were created. 299 posts were upgraded. 221 posts were reclassified. 645 posts were retitled. 1 post was regraded. 6 posts were reinstated. Madam Speaker, in part 2 of the book, this section shows the revision of salaries for the 2022 through to the 2026 contract period, consequent on the heads of agreements signed between the Government of Jamaica, various unions, and the bargaining groups. Part 3, Madam Speaker, abolitions. This section shows the abolition of 1,325 posts from the establishment of several ministries and departments. Madam Speaker, the affirmative resolution is therefore sought for the civil service establishment General Order 2026. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Could you turn on your mic, Minister? I'm asking if you could now move the motion, notice of which you had given.
Madam Speaker, I now move that the motion, notice of which was given on the 10th day of March 2026, be approved.
Thank you, Minister. Members, the question is that the motion, notice of which was given on the 10th day of March 2026, be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I now ask for the recommittal of motions, notice of motions given orally.
The question is that we recommit notices of motions given orally. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the pensions, superannuation funds and retirement schemes, registration, licensing and reporting amendment regulations 2026 resolution. Whereas Section 58(1) of the Pension, Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Financial Services Commission may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations for such matters as may be necessary or expedient for the purposes of the Act. And whereas on the 11th day of March 2026, the Financial Services Commission, with the approval of the Minister, made the Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Scheme Registration, Licensing and Reporting Amendment Regulation 2026. And whereas Section 58(2) of the Act provides that regulations made under Section 58(10) shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas it is desirable that the Pension Superannuation Fund and Retirement Schemes, Registration, Licensing and Reporting Amendment Regulations 2026 be affirmed. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. The resolution may be cited as the Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes, Registration, Licensing and Reporting Amendment Regulations 2026 Resolution. The Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes, Registration, Licensing and Reporting Amendment Regulation 2026, which was laid on the table of the House on the 24th day of March 2026 is hereby affirmed.
Minister.
Okay. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the Insurance Amendment of 20th Schedule Regulation 2026, which was laid on the table of the House on the 24th day of March 2026, be referred to the Regulations Committee of the House for consideration and report. And Madam
With Whoop, start improving your fitness from day one with real-time insights and guidance built around your goals.
Today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the Conk Export Levy Rate of Levy Order 2026 Resolution. Whereas Section 31C2 of the Conk Export Levy Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Minister may, from time to time, by order subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, prescribe the rate of levy to be paid to the Veterinary Services Division by exporters for any conch season after the 2010 conch season. And whereas on the 12th day of March 2026, the Minister made the conch export levy rate of levy order 2026. And whereas it is desirable that the conch export levy rate of levy order 2026 be affirmed, now therefore be resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the conch export levy rate of levy order 2026 resolution. 2. The conch export levy rate of levy order 2026, which was laid on the table of the House on the 24th day of March 2026, is affirmed. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you, House Leader. We continue in public business. House Leader. Minister of Finance will go first.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the insurance amendment of... No, sorry.
Minister, hold a moment, please.
I'm sorry. Madam Speaker.
House Leader, in the interim, would you be so kind as to go to public business in the order you gave, and then we'll go back to Minister of Finance, please?
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier today.
The question is, we suspend the standing orders to allow for the Minister's motion. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, this Honourable House should note that the Conch Export Levy Act was passed in 2009 with its main purpose to facilitate the imposition of a levy to be paid on each pound of conch exported during each conch season, pursuant to Section 3 of the Act. Section 9 of the Act, which established the Fisheries Management Development Fund, the fund, mandates that all the proceeds of the levy collected are to be allocated to the fund to facilitate the sustainable management and development of the fisheries sector. Section 11 of the Act stipulates that any exporter who fails to pay the levy commits an offence and is liable to summary conviction in a parish court to a fine equivalent to 5 times the value of the unpaid amount of the levy, or $3 million, whichever is greater, and in default of payment, to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months. Section 12 of the Act provides for the unpaid levy to be recovered summarily by the Commissioner without limit to the amount as a civil debt in a parish court at the suit of the Attorney General. Madam Speaker, for this conch season, I have decided not to increase the rate of levy currently charged. Therefore, the rate of 50 cents in the currency of the United States of America, or its Jamaican equivalent, per pound of conch exported remains in place for the 2026 conch season. In exercise of the power conferred upon me as Minister and pursuant to Section 31C2 of the Act, on March 12, 2026, I made the order for an exporter to pay a levy at the rate of 50 US cents, or its Jamaican equivalent, to the Veterinary Services Division for each pound of conch exported during the 2026 conch season. The object of the order pursuant to Section 3 of the Act is the legally required person who proposes to export or who exports conch to pay to the Veterinary Services Division a levy of 50 cents in the currency of the United States of America, or the equivalent in Jamaican currency, for each pound of conch exported during the 2026 conch season. In the circumstances, Madam Speaker, and as I indicated, there is no intention to increase the levy, as I think all members of the House can understand. With the passage of Hurricane Melissa, a number of our industrial fishers would have suffered significant damage, and as such, given the matters highlighted above, I ask this Honourable House for its support in affirming by resolution the conch export levy, rate of levy, Order 2026.
Thank you, House Leader. The member from Clarendon, Northwest? From Westmoreland. From Westmoreland Central it is.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have found a home now. I will not be moving anymore.
Afterwards, it will be. You have a mic on there.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In relation to this matter,
Member Campbell, turn your mic on again, please. Thanks. And then Member Jackson, turn yours on. Thanks.
thank you, Madam Speaker. In relation to this matter, I just have a few queries. The minister phrased it to say that he would not be increasing the levy this year based on the impact of Hurricane Melissa. I'm just wondering though if there was consideration that you could waive it or that you could decrease it to give them an opportunity to recover. The folks in Westmoreland and in St. Elizabeth suffered severe damage. There's one particular proprietor that operates in both your constituency and my minister, and he suffered significant damage to his facility, and I'm sure it would be significant if he could get a waiver or a deferral, or even in the event where they make the payment after selling the cup, because it must be one of the only industries where we actually charge persons to export the items, right? A selected few, at least, that we actually charge persons to export. So if you give them a quota for, say, 100,000 pounds of corn, they have to come up with 50,000 US. Because that's what it represents, 50 cents per pound. So if they get the quota for 100,000 pounds of corn to export, they have to come up front with 50,000 US, which seems a little bit, especially under the circumstances, it seems a little bit onerous to those persons who are participating in the industry. And I do believe that we are one of the few countries that has MSC certification for corn, and therefore, based on that, we should allow persons that participate in the industry to be able to earn sufficiently so that they can support their families. So those are my few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Westmoreland Eastern. Member from St. Catherine South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, just two short questions. Could you indicate what the annual volume is like for our conch export? And secondly, can you comment on whether or not there is any continued incursion of the reaping of conch in Jamaican waters? Because it once used to be a major challenge for our conch exporters. Thank you.
Thank you, members. I will start with Member Jackson, member from St. Catherine. So, based on the interventions of the government with the procurement of vessels to support the work of the JDF Coast Guard, we have seen much less in terms of incursion. I won't tell you that it is completely wiped out, but significant reduction. In fact, the first day that we purchased and put out the new vessel, they caught people. And this was years ago now. We have since that time more than doubled the fleet that is out there. So we're seeing a much significant decrease in those incursions, and it is also showing in terms of the population of conch that we have out there, which has allowed us to increase the quota over the last 2 years. I think we're now at 300 metric tons for the export amount. I will double check just to ensure I have the, yeah. Yes, our main market is the EU. Our main market continues to be the EU. And just to say, we are taking steps to go into value addition, right? So we're not, as you would have heard, we are now the only MSC certified wild-caught conch in the entire world. And why that is something for us to celebrate, you may remember that a few years ago, we shut down our conch industry because our numbers were not sufficient. And we managed that for 2 years. And we worked with the industry to ensure that when we went back in, we were top of the class in terms of sustainability. So now Jamaica is the only country in the world that has a wild-caught conch that is MSC certified, which is something very, very significant. The opposition spokesperson on agriculture, just a couple things. So, in relation to the maintenance of the levy at this rate is actually a reduced rate, right? So when we had come back after the 2 year that we did not have conch fisheries, when I met with the industry, we agreed that we would reduce the usual rate. So we cut the rate in half. So it was actually $1. So what we have been doing is maintaining this rate. So I said for this year, because we had to maintain it because of Hurricane Beryl, we also had to maintain it. But it is important that we have some resources, because to maintain our MSC certification, we have to do things like annual conch surveys, and it costs, right? So we still have to maintain some inflows. However, we are taking steps to treat with what you have said, and you will see that probably next week we will bring a bill to Parliament that gives the minister the power to waive or to accept a partial payment or payment in installments, so that people will be able to export and not have to pay all of the same. So we've already done that work. In fact, we moved to do that. I moved to that as minister when we had Hurricane Beryl, and recognized that legally you did not have the power to so do. So we have gone through the legislative process. Cabinet has already approved the legislation, and I expect it will be before the House. The next time we sit, it will be before the House. So that will treat with that and give us the ability to work with those fishers. Just to say as well, and I will highlight it when I do make my presentation, my substantive presentation. But just to say, we have been rolling out a package of direct support to a number of those fishers, not just our small artisanal fishers, but also those intermediate fishers and the industrial fishers. And the package of support starts from about 200,000, but most of the intermediate fishers have gotten between 1 million to 3 million in direct grant. And most of the industrial fishers have gotten between 3 million to 5 million in direct grants to help them to start again, seeing that they suffered so much damage. With that said, Madam Speaker, I ask that the motion be approved.
House, the question is that the motion be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to allow the minister to take the motion, notice of which was given earlier. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I ask that the motion be approved.
Members, the question is that the motion, notice of which was given earlier, be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader? No, it wasn't.
Madam Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today, and as such, I ask that the House be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Members, we are in receipt of communication in respect of the National Blood Drive. I'm just putting out to the members, this is preliminarily, that there will be an exercise conducted, and we are encouraging all members to at least put yourself up for screening to see if you're able to contribute to giving blood. As we encourage all Jamaicans to give blood where they can so that it saves lives, we will, many of us, be encouraging Jamaicans by us setting the example in the House. So, Minister of State and the Minister of State in the Ministry of Health and Wellness has been given charge by the lead minister, Minister Tufton, and you will see her conversing with you. Please let her know your willingness and your intent to partake in the blood drive once the screening is ready. Thanks, members. As said by the House Leader, there will be no further business for today. I ask that this House adjourn. Members, those in favor? Not yet. Not yet. Members, this honorable House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Introducing Canva Email. Now, it's so much simpler to promote your business. Just drop.
All right. Well, people, when you make one know make of it, comment, like, share it, and we're going to discuss it in the next video. Pick up on yourself. Much respect for watching. Thanks. Bless up.